Mas é isso, com várias coisas. Porque tem vários cenários,
Gostaria de agradecer aqui a visita de todos, aqui a Federação da Agricultura, o nosso convidado aqui, Daniel, Zacaria. Vou ficar mais fácil aqui para mim, viu, senhor? E aí, agradecer a presença de todo mundo. Você também a satisfação de receber o Dr. Carlos. O Dr. Carlos é um parceiro antigo, um homem que a gente tem muito respeito. Em nome deles, agradecer a todo mundo aqui, a visita à Federação da Agricultura, a Casa do Produtor Rural. Mertil, fica à vontade, cadê a sua?
Não, eu só agradecer. Agradecer ao Amilcar e à Federação que deu esse apoio, foi fundamental para que a gente pudesse iniciar essa missão, né? Essas ações aí que envolvem o programa do Banco Mundial. Parabenizar também e agradecer a todo o empenho do pessoal da FUNSEM, a Meire está aqui com a equipe dela, o Eduardo não pôde vir, tinha um compromisso, mas a FUNSEM ela está fazendo a integração que a gente queria, viu? Aquela integração entre o que a gente conhece de agrometeorologia, de meteorologia, aplicado à agricultura. O que eles vão mostrar aqui é uma ação desse tipo. Como a gente pode fazer essa colaboração, essa integração entre a ciência e a prática. E a agricultura é fundamental, e o clima é fundamental para a nossa agricultura aqui, a gente conhecer melhor e a gente ter a oportunidade de aplicar melhor todas as técnicas e transferir isso ao agricultor. Porque às vezes fica só nos órgãos de meteorologia ou fica só na universidade e o agricultor lá na ponta ele não é beneficiado por isso. E aí beneficia todo mundo, não só o agricultor, mas com o sistema de recursos hídricos como todo. Agradecer a presença de todos, eu vi que o público aqui, a gente até achou que ia vir assim, menos pessoas, porque é uma ação mais pontual, mas eu vejo que o auditório está lotado. Parabéns a mim pela mobilização e agradecer a minha equipe da CEDET também. E agradecer a presença do Dr. Carlos Prado, vice-presidente da FIEC, grande produtor, referência aqui. Agradecer também a Carlos Mato, nosso companheiro aqui de trabalho aqui em algumas ações dos projetos que a FAEC vem fazendo. Falar um pouco, vou ser breve aqui, mas eu preciso falar sobre Snyder e Daniel Zacaria. Richard Snyder foi meu supervisor no pós-doutorado lá na Califórnia. É uma referência em agrometeorologia no mundo, é um dos mais citados no mundo em termos de meteorologia e de agricultura irrigada. E ele tem feito um trabalho pioneiro e criou um exemplo de projeto que foi o SIMS, né, o Sistema de Gerenciamento da Irrigação da Califórnia, que fez a integração, que é o que a gente quer aqui, entre a Universidade da Califórnia e o Departamento de Recursos Hídricos da Califórnia, o que é similar à Secretaria de Recursos Hídricos. Lá eles têm um departamento só de irrigação, que cuida da agricultura irrigada e faz o gerenciamento acho que 180 estações, mais ou menos. Então, mais ou menos 150 estações que eles monitoram e fazem esse trabalho aí de transferência da informação ao agricultor, que é o serviço de assessoramento ao irrigante. Ou seja, eu tenho aquelas estações instaladas, aquelas estações me dão informações importantes de quando e quanto irrigar, e isso não é, às vezes, transferido para o agricultor. O agricultor precisa saber, isso é importante. E eles fazem esse trabalho que foi em 1982, fazendo 40 anos esse ano. Você vai... 40 anos esse ano. 40 anos esse ano, 40 anos dos Cines. E isso é uma referência que a gente pode ter aí como espelho e fazer esse link com a FUSEM. A FUSEM tem as estações instaladas em todo o estado e está instalando mais aqui em vários locais, e com o programa do Banco Mundial. Eles estão aqui justamente nessa questão do programa do Banco Mundial. Nós adquirimos estações e o Rick vai apresentar uma nova metodologia, que foi também alvo do projeto Banco Mundial, que é uma metodologia de surface review, que é você não só determinar a evapotranspiração da grama, mas determinar a evapotranspiração das culturas, determinar o KC das culturas, que é muito importante. O KC que a gente utiliza hoje, né, o Thales está aqui, professor da UFC, o KC que a gente utiliza hoje praticamente do manual da FAO, que foi feito há 40 anos atrás, e que totalmente defasado, as culturas mudaram, as variedades mudaram, a fisiologia das plantas, isso foi alterado, então, e evoluiu muito e não serve como parâmetro. Então é uma dificuldade, se a gente consegue obter o KC da banana, o KC da banana no Vale do Jaguaribe, o KC da goiaba lá no tabuleiro de luz, isso ajuda bastante a gente a economizar água. A gente está falando aqui de água, de muita água que a gente pode economizar. Então isso é basicamente a gestão de recursos hídricos na agricultura irrigada. E é isso que eles vão apresentar. Outro ponto importante, meu presidente amigo, é que eles, em 2018, organizaram uma missão na Califórnia, que eu fiz juntamente com o pessoal da Embrapa, o pessoal da ADES e do Centec também. Nós fizemos uma missão onde a gente percorreu do norte ao sul da Califórnia, passando ali pelo São Joaquin Valley, Central Valley, Imperial Valley, lá no sul, visitando áreas de produção, diferentes culturas que o Daniel vai apresentar, e também apresentando como é que é feita a interlocução com o agricultor ali. Foi uma missão espetacular. E o Daniel Zacaria, que organizou tudo, ele já se comprometeu comigo, vai fazer essa missão, amigo, e organizar no tempo que a gente quiser. É só a gente decidir qual é o mês e tudo. Ele já sugeriu alguns meses para que a gente possa fazer isso aí. Isso é muito importante para que a gente possa conhecer outras experiências. Daniel vai falar sobre isso. Daniel Zacaria, ele, falando um pouco dele, ele é italiano, mas está 10 anos lá em Davis, como professor, como pesquisador e também é uma das pessoas mais citadas em termos de trabalho científico sobre irrigação no mundo. E tem um trabalho fabuloso, não só na Califórnia, mas como em outros países, o Chile principalmente, ele tem um trabalho muito forte no Chile. Vai apresentar um pouco aqui sobre a irrigação na Califórnia, o valor bruto da produção agropecuária, a importância da agricultura naquele país. País que vocês sabem que o PIB é gigantesco, voltado muito para a tecnologia da informação, né? Google, Apple, estão lá, voltado para cinema, para Hollywood. Esse é o grande PIB lá, mas não deixa da agricultura participar, e a agricultura tem grande importância lá. E um grande valor bruto da produção. Então, aqui a proposição aqui, quando eles vieram, eles estão aqui para uma missão junto com a FUNSEM, para ver as estações. Hoje mesmo eles já estão indo para Limoeiro, vão ficar lá em Limoeiro, vão ficar 3 dias lá em Limoeiro, depois vão para Petrolina, para ver sobre a transposição de São Francisco, entender um pouco sobre isso, junto com o pessoal da Codevas, e depois voltam. Mas quando eles falaram que estariam aqui, a gente acertou a data, eu falei com o amigo, é importante demais a gente estar apresentando isso e junto, lá na FAEC, na federação, eu acho que isso é um ponto positivo para a FAEC, o amigo encampou a ideia, abraçou, e a gente está aqui hoje para ouvir isso. Então eu vou primeiro chamar o Daniel para apresentar, depois o Snyder faz a apresentação e depois a gente pode dar para as considerações. Com relação à tradução, o Rodrigo Pondé, agradecer mais uma vez, o Rodrigo está fazendo a tradução aí, com vocês, quem pegou o radinho aí, quem não pegou não pega mais, não, mas acho que ainda tem 2, né, Rodrigo? Precisa ter fone de ouvido. Quem tiver fone de ouvido ainda tem 2 aqui, porque os demais já acabou. E também a gente está à disposição para qualquer... Quando a gente finalizar, a gente faz as perguntas e tal. Daniel?
Well, Silvia, thank you very much for inviting me and us. I think for me it's the 5th time in Fortaleza, and every time I'm really happy to be here. I feel like home. Very similar to Italy, to be honest. And so, well, I'm happy to be here. What I'm going to present today, it's general information about California agriculture and water throughout the state. It's a large state, there's a lot of production, but also some example applied research project that we just completed on updating the information of a crop coefficient and evapotranspiration of a very important crop that is expanding a lot, a high value crop. So, as Silvio mentioned, we both work for the Cooperative Extension. Cooperative Extension is a large organization under the umbrella of the University of California. So we are in charge of doing research and education. So transfer of the research findings to farmers, to consultants, to state agencies. So we are somehow the connection between the academic environment and the production agriculture. And it's an interesting organization because it's very effective, because there's a lot of trust in what the university does, because we don't do theoretical, virtual modeling research. We do things to solve growers' problem, to make their life easier, their income, to increase their income. So our activity is devoted to improve the wealth of the people of California, but specifically production agriculture. All right, so here's a list of topics that I would like to cover. I'm going to provide some background information about California agriculture and water. And then we'll talk a little bit about the trends that we're noticing in the irrigated agriculture throughout the state, and the water-related implication of those trends. As a third topic, I'm going to talk about an applied research project on Pistachio. Here's a few information about California agriculture. These are taken from the United States Department of Agriculture and the California Department of Food and Agriculture. As you can see, all in all, we have in the last couple of years, the total number of farms in California were around 70,000. And those farms generated a $52.6 billion industry. This is coming from the agricultural production. It's a huge industry, but see, it counts less than 2% out of the total income of the state. And so it's very low in terms of percentage, but it's strategic. Without California agriculture, all the other industry will probably not be able to live and survive, because the California production is, and so all the other sectors somehow rely on food and biofuels. The total income of the state is about $3 trillion US dollar per year. This is a yearly income. We got almost 10 million hectares of agricultural land. It's a big state, big agricultural state. We got about, out of this total farmland, about 5.7 million hectares are rain-fed, so rangeland and pasture. And then we got about 4 million acres of irrigated cropland, out of which 2.5 are annual crops, so corn, vegetable, everything that is not permanent, and 1.3 million hectares is orchards and vineyards. Okay, so those are the general figures. We got almost 400 crops throughout the state, so it's a lot of different production. And here's some records. California is the #1 food and agriculture producer in the US. So this has been going on for about 50 years now. It's always been the #1 state. More than 50% of the US fruits and nuts and vegetables are produced in California. So it's like an agricultural power-up. It produces food for the rest of the United States. And also is the #1 dairy production state. It produces about 19% of the dairy products of milk and cheese and yogurt and all the dairy production. Here's the California agricultural income broken down in different commodities. As you can see, fruit and nut is the #1 production. It's about almost 40% of the total. But then you got livestock, vegetable crop, field crop, flowers, and all the other crops. So this gives you an idea of the most important crops. And here's an example of what we normally go on a day-to-day field. This is the landscape that we normally deal with. Here's the state with the main agricultural region. So you can see Intermountain is very good for forages like alfalfa, corn, grain. And then we got the Sacramento Valley here in green, and this is the San Joaquin Valley, which is called the fruit basket of the world. And also other important areas are the coast here, the delta, the central coast and the south coast. And as Silvio was mentioning, the desert area, which is also very intensive production of fruit and vegetable, mainly vegetable. 7 out of 10 most important agricultural counties are here in this San Joaquin Valley, okay, the yellow area. And the valley produces about 60% of the total agricultural income. So 60% is only in this central part of the state. This is also the state that is suffering for water shortages because there's a lot of intensification of fruit and nut production, and I'll show you in a minute. In terms of agricultural water use, is the #1 state. So it's #1 for good and bad. So it's #1 for production, but also is throughout the entire United States is the #1 state for use of water. And the top irrigated land is orchards and vineyards. So those are the two types of crops that takes most of the water. All right? Now, talking about trends, we're seeing an intensification of agriculture in the Central Valley, in the desert, and in the Central Coast, the North Coast and Central Coast. So those are areas where agriculture is intensifying because there's more security of water supply. The Central Valley, because of the groundwater, so if we have drought, there's still the groundwater that allows growers to pump water from the aquifer. The Bay Delta area, this is where the San Francisco Bay enter into the ocean. And so there's a lot of water coming from the mountains, from the snow melt, and need to go to the ocean to push the salt away. So there's kind of a basic flow that is needed, but the area around can rely on a lot of water supply. That's fresh water supply. And the desert here is the Imperial Valley, the Coachella Valley. This area gets water from the Colorado River Basin. So Colorado River is a huge, similar to the San Francisco River, it's a huge river that serves 7 states. So Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, California. California is the end of the system, and it's probably unique in the world. The tail end of a river system that gets most of the water. It's kind of unique because California put a lot of money to build the network, and so is entitled to take most of the water. But the quality of that water, of course, after crossing so many states, it gets degraded. So a lot of water comes to the Colorado, to the desert, but the quality is not as good. So these 3 areas, they produce together, they produce 35% of the U.S. table food, but only on 1% of the total U.S. area. So the intensity of California agricultural production is pretty high. What we're seeing over the year is that the cropping patterns, the intensification of the cropping pattern. Basically, there's a lot of conversion from annual to perennial crop. So growers move to more profitable crops, so vineyards and orchards, and abandon somehow the annual crop. So this is kind of this trend is supported by the government. So the government is providing financial incentive to make this happen. But also there's a intensification in terms of number of trees per hectares, number of plants per hectares, and all of this requires more water and more nutrients. So even if you have the same acreage but more intensive production, that requires more fertilizer, more water. And there's a shift also from surface irrigation to micro irrigation, basically drip and micro sprinkler. The idea, I think is incorrect, but the idea of the government is that if you move to this more efficient irrigation system, you're going to save water. It didn't happen. It never happens all over the world that when you move to this micro irrigation or drip irrigation, you save water. The water is more productive, but you don't save water. So in terms of water conservation, there's no benefit, but you produce more. So water productivity is higher, for sure. And this is what is happening actually is a kind of a rebound effect. So growers can reduce the amount of water and make water more productive, but they expect, and sometimes the water use even increases. Because when you spoon feed your crop is healthier, more productive, and takes more water. So this is called the rebound effect. Luciano Mateos published a paper and a booklet. FAO published a booklet also on this rebound effect. When there are a lot of investment in micro irrigation, there's always not a water saving for the area, unless you restrict the area, the crop area. So there's a clear effect of rebound of this more efficient irrigation system. Of course, it's more productive, but in terms of overall water use, there's no saving at the state level. So all these trends are encouraged by incentive from federal government and from the state government. Replace their irrigation system and go from sprinkler to drip, sprinkler to micro sprinkler. And so environmental water generates healthy river, and that's considered a benefit for healthy tourism and healthy life, for a good state of the environment. So it's considered beneficial water use. But as you can see, out of the total amount of water that is used, the majority is California is used by the environment, not by agriculture. So environment is the first, agriculture is the second, urban water second is the third. So there's always also a misconception about California irrigation and California agriculture taking most of the water. This is not true. It's the environmental sector that uses most of the water. As I was mentioning, in irrigated crops, the water agencies and regulators are promoting this shift towards micro irrigation, and farmers follow this encouragement and push and financial incentive. But at the same time, they shift from annual crop to permanent crop. Sometimes they expand the crop areas because they receive more income. With the same amount of water, or with a little bit amount, higher amount of water, they can maximize their net profit. This is the result of a survey that is conducted every 5 years now by the Department of Water Resources and UC Davis. Rick Snyder was the main PI on the last survey. As you can see, here's the trend from this, let's say 1970 up to 2016 or 2015. You can see a sharp decline of gravity irrigation, so surface irrigation, and a rapid increase of micro irrigation, drip and micro sprinkler. Sprinklers stayed pretty much the same, and this is a minor irrigation system like a subsurface irrigation. And as I was saying also, there's a lot of, the other trend is a conversion from field crops here in black. They declined a lot over the years, and orchards and vineyards increased a lot. So there's two trends, intensification of production and change to micro irrigation. And this means that this new cropping system requires much more accurate water management, much more skilled irrigator, much more educated irrigator. Because with micro irrigation, it's a game changer. You change completely the water management aspect. All this, that the trends that I showed allow to move the water productivity over the years and to increase it quite a bit. So the water productivity increased in the last, I would say, between 2000 and 2010, increased by 35%. And this is the results of more efficient irrigation practice, more productive crop. Also, the genetic improvement is part of this water productivity increase. But this comes with a cost for the environment, so it's not free of charge. And you can see, moving from surface irrigation to micro irrigation, the productivity also, because with micro irrigation you deliver high frequency amount of fertilizer, so you keep your crop very strong, very happy. And as you can see, this is an example of surface irrigated orchard, and now with drip, everything is dry. So also the pest control is much easier because you have healthier orchards, and you don't have to spray them so much. The weed also control is much easier with micro irrigation. But anyway, this is an economic performance indicator, economic water productivity. It doesn't consider the cost for the environmental cost. The environmental cost is that you need water with a very high frequency. And this water with a very high frequency, the water district cannot deliver this water with the 2 days rotation, or every 2 days or every day. So what you do, you basically pump a lot of water from the aquifer, because the aquifer is somehow kind of an on-demand system. And the water delivery system in California are mostly designed for rotation. So 7 days, 10 days. So you, as a grower, you receive water every 10 days or 7 days, but you need water every day with the micro irrigation. So basically, what do? There's a mismatch between the water delivery and the water demand. And the result of this, that growers pump a lot of water from the aquifer. And that comes with an environmental cost. Now, moving to the general aspects, in California, the rationale for optimal irrigation scheduling has always been to apply water to meet the ET, the crop water requirement, what we call ETC. And this comes with a usual equation of we calculate ETC multiplying reference ET or grass reference ET by crop coefficient. This is a general way of calculating the crop water requirement. And then, we normally obtain this from research or applied research project. And so this is what we use normally and what we extend to growers, so they can combine the reference ET with the updated crop coefficient and schedule their irrigation with micro sprinkler or drip. Now, it's in the last few years there were a lot of improvement in the making reliable data or reference ET available throughout California, and this happened through the SENAR-CE. This is a California Irrigation Management Information System, and Silvio anticipated there's an automated weather station, about 152 throughout the state, and also the state developed another product that is called spatial signals. So you get a map, continuous map, and so if your farm is not close to a SENAR station, you can click on the map and obtain the reference ET data, the ETO data. And Rick will talk a little bit more about this. And this is another product that Rick will talk about. This is a FREC forecast ET from the National Weather Service. So growers can now receive reference ET information 7 days in the future. So today, I can know with some good accuracy what is going to be the ETO of the next 7 days, and this helps a lot the grower in getting the irrigation schedule prepared. Now, when I started in 2013, I thought everything was already done, and so I started questioning, so what should I do here? Everybody in my predecessor at work, in every aspect of water management, so they basically at the beginning I felt there was nothing to do, but the question is with the current condition, are this crop coefficient that we had from the past research still valid, or we have to update them? And it's a main question. I'll show you why. So the available information on water use for the different crops were mainly developed during the 70s, 80s, and 90s with lysimeters, so very laborious method, and also with indirect methods like soil water balance, or nutrient probe, soil moisture monitoring, or sometimes with educated guess. But also the previous research referred to crop varieties that were very frequent, in the past, but now they're completely different. So the genetic improvement and the research work gave us like a lot more varieties, more productive varieties. Also, I show you the change in irrigation methods. So all the crop coefficient that we had from FAO or from other research work are somehow refer to infrequent irrigation methods, so surface irrigation. Now, with micro irrigation, the crop water use dynamics is totally different. And there were crops that were less important in the past that now are very spread. So wine grapes on slope in California is very common. Citrus with a lot of varieties with a different planting density, lemons, mandarin hybrids, grapefruits, different varieties, oranges with different type of planting density. But also the canopy managed to change a lot over the year, and then whether you plant east-west or north-south makes a lot of difference, right? And so pistachio is another typical crop. There was very little in the past, like 30 years ago, they barely started, and now there's a lot of pistachio throughout the state, or table grapes and raisin with different trailing systems. So now things need to be much more accurate, because the variation that you had throughout California of all these crops is tremendous. So you got different trellis, different height, different canopy management, different planting density, different irrigation methods. So we need to be much more accurate in the crop efficiency. So at on farm level, we need accurate crop efficient information for scheduling irrigation, for predicting how much water we're going to need. Also, water comes with energy now, because you need to pressurize water into this pipe systems. And also, we need to somehow get a sense of how much water the water district should allocate to different areas. But also now, sometimes we are in a drought, and so we don't know how much acreage we can maintain. Can we maintain that acreage? Can we expand it? Can we have to shrink it? There's a lot of planning, water resource planning question. But also, we have to somehow think about some deficit irrigation strategy for different crops with respect to the baseline water use. At the off-farm level, district and basin, growers have to comply with a lot of regulations, environmental regulations. SIGMA, this is Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It's a revolution, because growers cannot pump as much as they want. Groundwater is being regulated now in California since 2014, and so now the amount of water that you extract has to be less than the amount of water that goes into the into the groundwater for recharge. So there's a lot of new regulation. But it's also important to know if we can transfer some water from rich water area to poor water area. So water transfer and water trading. So California is now entering into this idea that the water can be bought and sold by growers. If they retire the land here, they can move water and sell it to some other growers, so water trading. But also at the state level, there's always to update the California Water Plan, and also there are a lot of financial incentives that growers can apply for if they show they are efficient. So they have to show they have a level of efficiency, and then they can apply and receive the financial benefit. The other one, the last one, is estimating how much product we get per unit of water. So the economic water productivity is important. Now, in the last 10 years, Rick and I have been engaged in a variety of applied research to improve irrigation management of permanent crops. Those are high-value crops, so almonds, pistachio, wine grapes, table grape. And so we did pistachio on non-saline and increasingly saline soils. We did wine grapes on slopes, and we did it in California and Chile. And we're also still doing citrus water use research to document, if mandarin takes the same amount of water as oranges or lemons. And so this is an area that is still going on in terms of research. I'll focus a little bit on the Pistachio project because we just completed it. Here's the context. California produces 99% of the US pistachio, so it's basically almost every pistachio nut that is consuming and produced in the US comes from California. We have about 370, around 400,000 acres, so let's say 150,000 hectares, and the total production, increases every year. So there's a large expansion every year because the crop is very profitable. It's drought tolerant, is salinity tolerant, and it adapts to different. So it's very rough. It's a very rough crop that adapts to different conditions. Here is the San Joaquin Valley, and in red you can see all the pistachio that is spread out everywhere. So we got pistachio everywhere, and it's still expanding. Every year it expands by 10 to 15% more acreage. The counties that produce almost 95% of the pistachio are Madera, Fresno, Kings, Tulare, and Kerr. So those are the 5 counties, and most of the pistachio production is there. Pistachio is expanding on saline soil. Saline soils are marginal soils where you cannot grow almost any other crop because the tolerance of the different crops to salinity is much lower. With pistachio, you can still have an economic, profitable production. According to some estimate, 20 to 25% of the total acreage now is on marginal soils. So soils that otherwise you don't grow anything because the salinity or the problem in the soils are too high to be stood by the crop. The problem is, and all this production areas is on aquifers that are already overdrafted. So the aquifer level in all this production area decline over the course of the year. So there's the aquifer quality degradation. So it's not only depletion. You can see here, red dots are areas where you have like minus 25 feet in the last 5-6 years. So the level declined by 25 feet is almost, let's say, 9 meters, 8 to 9 meters decline. And it's also water quality degradation problem. So here, groundwater will be restricted. So with the new regulation about groundwater pumping, the use of groundwater will be restricted. So you cannot take everything that you want. So there's a water resource planning and management problem in these areas. But when we started in 2016, there was no information available on ET, pistachio grown with micro irrigation, because the previous research was done on sprinkler irrigation. And there was no information on PC or crop profusion and AT on pistachio grown on saline soil. Of course, the salt will have consequences on the water use. So we started in 2016, we completed in 2019, and so here is an example of the non-saline orchard, low saline, medium saline, high saline. And this area is also saline solvent. So very difficult to manage because salinity, when it comes by itself, is, it's one thing, but if you have salinity and sodicity, it means that the soil is very difficult to manage. We have Claude Ivan here that is an expert on these things, and he's seen probably saline solid soil in California. So you can see, the crop is happy on non-saline soil, less happy when the salinity increases here. And here you see same age crop, same age trees, but because of the difference in soils and salinity, you got very different trees. And I'll show you this. So our objective was to measure ET and determine KC for well water orchards.
and determine also the effect of soil salinity on the canopy growth, and on the total water use, and on the yield, because we wanted to have an idea on productivity, water productivity. Here's the areas where we conducted research. We did it 4 years because pistachio has alternate bearing. So 1 year produces a lot, 1 year produces much less, and then it goes this way, biannual cycle. So we need to do at least 2 biannual cycles. And we did another orchard later on for only 2 years because we said, okay, this is saline, this is non-saline, and we wanted to collect more data on the non-saline, on an area that was, different for what concerned the water and the weather. So all orchard where the plant, struggle a little bit more to extract water. And so if the plant struggles, then the actual evapotranspiration is probably less, and the net yield is also less. But also, the tree cannot grow as expected for non-saline conditions. And if it doesn't have the same canopy size, it means that it intercepts less light, and there's less evapotranspiration. So it's kind of a dynamic problem, because the soil osmotic potential reduces the growth, and the growth reduces the yield, and the yield and the growth reduce the ET. So there's nothing much you can do. So we thought about an osmotic effect, but also an energetic effect due to less canopy size and less light interception by these trees. Here are the conditions. The non-saline EC of about 2 decisiemens per meter, and here is FPAR. FPAR is a canopy, fractional canopy cover. We measure fractional canopy cover. So the low saline, 4 to 5 decisiemens per meter, and canopy cover of about 55%. Medium saline, 6 to 8, and canopy cover about 45%. And high saline, 8 to 11 decisiemens per meter, and canopy cover about 34%. So there's a variety of conditions. Of course, they cannot have, they're all pistachio. And in the literature, it says pistachio takes like 1,000 millimeter per hectare. But they're all pistachio. But of course, they're very different growing conditions, and so for sure they're going to have different ET and different crop efficiency. So the activities that we conducted in the 4 years, we measured the evapotranspiration with the surface renewal and anti-covariance equipment, a combination of the two with the residual of energy balance. We also tried to measure below the canopy the fluxes, the water fluxes, trying to separate transpiration from evaporation. And then we capture the difference about the orchard. Then we measure the light interception with a new light bar. This is a tractor that enters the orchard and scans the amount of light that gets intercepted by the trees. This is an example here. The bigger is the canopy, the more light is intercepted. So the less light filters through the canopy, right? And then we did some flights in order to do some remote sensing of ET and see whether the satellite or the airborne remote sensing tools and models can somehow estimate the ET with a certain accuracy. We did some satellite remote sensing and airborne remote sensing in order to calculate the canopy temperature and DBI and a bunch of other parameters. This is the method that we use, is the residual of energy balance. So basically LE is the latent heat flux of evaporation. This is the ET, the actual ET term. And we obtain it from the difference between the net radiation minus ground heat flux minus sensible heat flux. Basically, LE is the amount of energy that is used to evaporate or transpire water. And the source of that energy is the sun. And so whatever comes to the crop minus the reflected radiation, that's the source of energy for doing the evaporation work. And then we measure the amount of energy that somehow results in heating the canopy, and we measure the amount of energy that is conducted into the ground. So net radiation minus heat, sensible heat flux minus ground heat flux give us this term. That's why it's called the residual of energy balance. And we do it with, we measure net radiation G and H. Net radiation we do with the net radiometer. This is a sensor that measures the incoming radiation and measure the outgoing radiation as a result of the reflection. And then we measure G with the ground heat flux package, ground heat flux plate for soil temperature probe. And then we measure the sensible heat flux with sonic anemometer and fine wire thermocouple. We do a parallel measurement in order to calibrate one versus the other. And Rick will explain this probably more detail. Oops, sorry. Here's some example of our station in grapes. You can see the sonic, the net radiometer, the thermocouple, and the rain gauge. And so those are example of different installation. This is for research purposes. We got some installation in table grapes here, and we got some installation in other crops. So just to give you a picture of how it looks like in the field. We also monitor the plant water status with pressure bombing. We call it midday stem water potential. We also did the canopy temperature measurement, and we did some measurement with the dendrometer. This is another sensor that measures the shrinking and swelling of the tree trunk, and that's can be related to the plant, the tree water status. We did also some other measurement. We measured the soil moisture with tensiometer and watermarks because of the salinity. So tensiometer are somehow able to give you an idea of the water tension in the soil, regardless of the salinity. And then we did some other measurement with the EM38. This is electromagnetic induction. And we basically scanned the orchard in order to map the EC, the apparent EC, and then we calibrated versus soil sample. It's kind of a complicated procedure. The UC Riverside and the USDA Salinity Lab in Riverside collaborated with us in doing this salinity survey. So we wanted to relate the salinity with the canopy size and ET, and that's what we did. And then at the end, we measure the yield and the quality. This is Renata, is a Brazilian visiting scientist from UNESCO, and she's been working on this project for 6 months, and she was a blessing. She was really very good in helping in the field with data analysis, and so we want her back, possibly. Here's the results that we got. As you can see, reference ET for grass in the nearby station, and this is a cumulative ET measure for non-saline, S0, low saline, medium saline, high saline. You can see the salinity impacts the water use, impact the ET. 2007, we got similar data with a sharp separation between non-saline. This is consumptive water use. This is what the tree used the season. And 2018 and 19, we got very similar results. Here there was some problem with evaporation, I think. There was a lot of water ponding, and so you see similar ET because there was probably a lot of water evaporation from the soil. Here's on a 4-year average, we got on the non-saline orchard with about 72-75% canopy cover, the seasonal ET was about 42 inches. This corresponds to 10,000 cubic meter per hectare. This is a lot of water. So Pistachio takes a lot of water. In the salt-affected orchard, we noticed that have significantly lower ET than the non-saline orchard. In terms of reduction, low with respect to the non-saline, low salinity has about 12% ET reduction, medium salinity is about 25% reduction, and high salinity is 35% reduction. So the results of this is that we go to the growers and say, oh, you are on saline soil, don't irrigate too much. Don't irrigate as you are growing in non-saline, because the tree will not take that water. Now, to schedule irrigation in California, most of the growers utilize a KC competition that was published by the Pistachio Production Manual of 2005, and this comes from a research that was done on sprinkler irrigated orchard, and this was done in the 90s. So if we don't update the information on periodically, there's a lot of water that gets wasted. And I will show you, this is the crop coefficient of the sprinkler irrigated pistachio, and this is what we found. You see the difference is about 30% less. So this is non-saline orchard, and with micro irrigation, you have a lot of water reduction in terms of KC. Okay. So if growers keep irrigating with this great KC, they waste a lot of water, they waste a lot of energy, because there's energy related to the amount of water that is pumped into the drip. And this is the KC published by the manual in 2005, and this is what we found. See, all this mid-season KC is much lower than what was published before on sprinkler irrigated orchard. And this is non-saline. When we consider the saline, you see this is the pistachio manual, and this is what we found: non-saline, low saline, medium saline, high saline. So the difference between the pistachio manual and what we found for the high salinity is more than 50%. So if growers that so if farmers grows pistachio on a very saline soil and irrigate with this, is a disaster, because it wastes a lot of water. This water doesn't penetrate the orchard because it's basically saline sodic, so the water doesn't get into the soil, and basically it's going to have excess water. It's going to have a very high soil evaporation. It's going to increase EC, because when the water evaporates, the salt concentrates, so the salinity increases further. And of course, it's going to have higher energy costs for pumping. So this graph gives you an idea of the impact of applied research. And when we outreach this information to growers, say, hey, you should irrigate less, because the water, your tree on saline conditions don't take so much water. Right? So we try to convince them to irrigate less, also because they save a lot of pumping. Then always we get the response, yes, but I'm leaching. No, you're not leaching, because those saline solid soil, water doesn't penetrate, and you're making the problem worse. This water is evaporating, the salt stay there, and you make the problem worse. So it's a disaster if they keep irrigating that way. So here's the decrease in tree performance. So you can see canopy cover, ET, and yield for the three different the level of salinity: non-saline, low saline, medium, and high. And those are the yield on a 4-year basis. So those are average, on and off. Okay, an average over the 4 years. And so basically, if we consider the performance reduction for the trees, basically low saline is about 20% less, medium saline is about 30% less, and high saline has 40, almost 50% less performance. So as a farmer, if I'm smart, what I would do, the plant doesn't develop so much, but it takes much less water, and produce much less. So the smart farmers say, oh, I can plant more trees per hectare. Exactly. You can do that because the plant will never catch up because of salinity conditions. So they are thinking proactively and they say, oh, maybe I can intensify that production. I can plant more trees per hectare. Which somebody is doing. The problem is with the harvesting equipment because they can now have one tree very close to the other because of the dimension of the harvesting equipment. The major long-term effect of salinity is mainly due to, you see here, the canopy cover versus time. So we did very frequent canopy cover measurement over the course of the season, and we saw that, this is non-saline, it just develops very fast. The other is low salinity, medium salinity, so they develop. So those are the canopy development curve. And this is the main effect of salinity on the tea. Okay? Here's the water productivity and water footprint that we get for the different levels of salinity. So you got ET, water footprint, yield, water productivity, and the productivity of the canopy. Because you have less canopy, we normalize in terms of the canopy. Here's the different values that we got. This was published. This research was published in a few papers. This is one of those. I want to show you that also the last thing that I want to show you is something that we tested one of the model metric, one of the satellite remote sensing based model on this ground data, and you see we checked whether the estimate from metric was somehow accurate with respect to ground data. And here you get the one-to-one line, and here are basically the satellite overpass and the ET. So we have measured daily ET with our ground station and metric ET here from the day of satellite overpass. And you can see basically the accuracy of metric was very low, especially on saline soil. Here's the main relative difference is, mean relative difference in percentage. You say, medium salinity to high salinity, basically about 45% difference. So metric ET was plus and minus 45% different with respect to our ground-based data. And so this is an eye-opener. We cannot do everything with remote sensing. In this kind of a growing condition, the remote sensing doesn't pick up the difference due to plant stress. It's not water stress because they were all well watered. It was salinity stress, but all the orchards were well watered. But the plants are still stressed because of the saline condition. I'll finish here. There's a lot of people involved in this research, and a lot of growers and a lot of collaborators. So this is an acknowledgement page, and so I'll stop here. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you so much.
Pessoal, só para a gente dar continuidade, chamar logo o Ray e avisar também que depois da palestra a gente tem aqui o Roger é tradutor, também se vocês tiverem alguma dúvida, precisar, aí procura o Roger pode fazer essa interlocução com eles, tá joia? Então eu agradeço mais uma vez o Daniel, parabéns pela apresentação. Mais informações também o Daniel vai estar à disposição. Chamar o Rick. Please.
It's difficult to follow him. I'd like to talk about a different topic. Okay, of course, Daniela and I are involved in the project down here in Brazil, and why we come here quite often. I think this is number 7 or 8. Anyway, quite a few. So it's exciting time that we're here. But we have a project, we're trying to do something similar to what we're doing in California. And I'm going to talk about FRET. FRET is Forecast Evapotranspiration. I was the principal investigator on the SENAR-CE project, California Irrigation and Information System, which was developed to provide evapotranspiration information to farmers all over California. I'll give you a little bit of history about that as I get into the talk. It's developed over time, but from the beginning, we always thought that forecast would be the best. But we never could find an easy way to do it until recently. And so now we're starting to use it. We've done some experiments with it, and we think it's really going to be helpful. And I'll talk about what we've done. So, okay. First, a little background. You probably all know this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway a little bit. ETO is reference evapotranspiration. And that's, we assume that this is the evapotranspiration of approximately 12 centimeter tall cool season grass. And there's an equation we use to estimate that for weather data. We don't measure the evapotranspiration of the grass, but we're measuring the weather, and we use the weather data in that equation to estimate what we think it is. And it's very accurate. It was developed by Monteith, and it's based on the Penman-Monteith equation. It was actually developed with data from Davis. And I took the same data and I calculated, and I got the same answer that Monteith did. So I know that it works very well, it's very accurate. As long as you have the right conditions, you can measure the weather properly. I'll talk a little bit more about that too. We assume that it's well watered, that there's no water stress in the grass, there's no disease, no salinity stress or anything. We're assuming that the only thing that affects evapotranspiration is the energy that's available to vaporize the water. And that's one of the assumptions you have to make when you do that. And we assume that other crops are going to be similar to that, but there's slight differences, and we use crop coefficients to adjust for that. So the potential crop, this one in the middle there, that's to represent any crop. It might be a tree crop, vines, could be any crop. We call it potential evapotranspiration, crop evapotranspiration. We usually use the symbol ETC, or evapotranspiration of the crop. And I put that it's energy limited, because it really is. It's not limited by salinity, it's not limited by water availability in the soil, it's only limited by the amount of energy that's there in that crop to vaporize the water. Some of it's going to heat the plants, heat the ground, some of it's going to evaporate water. And what we're doing is trying to calculate how much is going to evaporate the water. So those two on the left, we're assuming that it's well watered, it's energy limited. The one far left, the ETO, is for 12 centimeter tall grass crop. And the other one is for all the other crops. And we use that crop coefficient to adjust it to estimate the crop evapotranspiration from the ETO. So we put out, in California, we have 152 SENAR stations, weather stations, to measure the weather, and then we use the Penman-Monteith equation to estimate ETO. And we use the hourly equation. And I'm going to explain, there's an hourly equation, there's a daily equation. We use both of them, but SENAR-CE puts out the data from the hourly equation. So that ETC again is well watered. So when we use ETO and we use crop coefficients, we're estimating what we think the farmer should be doing. It's not what the farmer actually does. Because as Daniel pointed out, if we have a salinity problem, it's probably the evapotranspiration is different. So we don't know exactly what they're doing because management can affect the evapotranspiration. So when the state tries to estimate how much water they need, they always assume it's well water. So they're assuming that the case is correct. And often it's going to be less than that. It depends on what the farmer does. There's a lot of things that affect it. We do lots of measurements, and sometimes we look at the results and we say, what happened here? Why did the evapotranspiration drop? And we'll go out and we'll find out the farmer pruned the tops of the trees off or something. So things like this happen all the time. And there's no way the state's going to do that. Okay, so we're never going to be perfect. We try to get as close as we can. On the right, we have ETA, and Daniele pointed out ETA is the actual development transpiration. So that's what you would actually measure if you go to the field. So when we go to the field, we always write down ETA when we calculate the development transpiration. And then we usually do some kind of plant measurement with it to find out whether the plants are stressed or not. If they're not stressed, then we assume the ETA is the same thing as ETC. Okay, so we always start out assuming the ETA might be different. It could be the same as ETC, or it could be less. Okay? And so if I want to get that, the way we would get that is we have ETA is equal to, oops. Oh, there it is. Okay, ETA is equal to ETC times this is the stress coefficient. The problem is there's no easy way to get that stress coefficient without going out and measuring it. It's difficult to do that. And that's why the state doesn't use that when they estimate the water use. They use the well water conditions. Okay? There are a lot of people working on that, trying to find out, can we estimate the stress coefficients and come up with a better way to estimate. You can do it by estimating soil moisture and the soil characteristics, but it's not really that refined yet. We still have a lot of work to do. This is a map of showing the mean development transpiration by month for 18 different regions in California. I made that map with a colleague of mine from the Department of Water Resources. It was back in the ETO map was 1999. Should point out SENAR-CE, we started on SENAR-CE in 1982. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Campbell Scientific, and they make a lot of weather data stations and instruments and so on. They wouldn't exist today if it hadn't been for SENAR-CE, because they were ready to declare bankruptcy. We bought 37 stations in safety. And President and Vice President told me they were ready to stop the company. So that was a big effort. And we looked a long time to find out what we should use for our stations, and we decided on Campbell Scientific, and that's what kept them in business. But anyway, this map, when we did this in 1982, 80% of the irrigation in California was done surface irrigation. There wasn't hardly any drip. Drip irrigation was like 1% of the irrigated area in California. And also there weren't any computers. So people, I don't know, some of you probably weren't around that much then. But when we started with that, we bought the first laptop computer in my department in the SENAR-CE budget. So we didn't have computers. They had mainframe computers. We would type cards and put them into the computer. So I don't know, a lot of you guys probably remember that, but it's not so common anymore. Then we had to make the decision is how are we going to get this information to the farmers? And how are they going to use it? And we took a big risk as we said, well, probably computers are going to expand. And the farmers are starting to get computers for their keeping their records, the records of their sales and costs and everything. So we knew that they were starting to use it. And we decided that probably the best way is for us just to give out the ETL information and then teach the farmers how to use their computer. So that's always been the approach we had. The other alternative, which some of my colleagues wanted, was to have us do the calculations in our computer and get the results checked. But we didn't think the farmers would trust us. So we decided to go, we'll let them do their calculations. So anyway, this is the way we started. And this is fine if you're doing surface irrigation, because you irrigate every 7 or 10 days, it's okay, you're not going to make much mistake. If you irrigate every 7 to 10 days with flood irrigation, it won't make much difference. But if you're using drip irrigation, you're not going to do a very good job using this, because you miss all the variability. So this is an example. This is the first SENAR station in California. This is on the research plots next to the University of California, Davis. You can see Davis is really flat. But this is an example of what the stations look like. They all have the same thing. Some of the sensors are different because over time they've evolved. But this was the original station. So we measure wind speed, wind direction, solar radiation, we measure temperature and relative humidity, and we measure sun and ground temperatures. Then we have a rain gauge. The rain gauge has always been a problem because you notice there's grass around it. All these stations have grass around it, And so they have to be irrigated to keep the grass green and growing properly. And so they would run the sprinklers to do it. The sprinklers would get into the rain gauges, and so we had a lot of difficulty with rain gauges over time. But, so some of them we put off the grass, and we did different things to try to get around that. One of the reasons I put this up is that these are the equations that they use in SENAR-CE to calculate the FGT. The one in blue there is the daytime. It's a Penman-Monteith modification that originally came from FAO, but it was modified after that by the American Society of Civil Engineers, so they changed it. That used to be the equation that, and they had a different number, instead of 0.4, they had a different number in the FAO 56 modification. But Rick Allen and the other people that developed that were on our committee meeting, and we decided that they needed to have a daytime and nighttime, have a different celebrations. And so that's why we have two of them. We have the blue one is for daytime, and the gray one down below is for nighttime. And the reason why they're different is that the plants close their stomata at night. They close the pores of the leaf surfaces, so that it's a different canker resistance at nighttime than it is during daytime. And I remember we argued about this for 2 years before they decided. About 30 people, and it's hard to get 30 people to agree on something like that. But we finally decided that these are the ones that we're going to use. And so if you go back, there's a publication in Ag Water Management. I think Rick Allen was the first author on it. There's like 50 people on the paper. There's a lot of people on it. But they explain all this. And they do it because the canker resistance is different daytime and nighttime. We use this, so SENAR-CE, they use the hourly equation. There's also a daily equation. And then they use the same canker resistance daytime and nighttime, which is not really correct, and that's why we did this. When we do the forecast ET, we use the daily equation, because we don't have enough data to do all the equations. It's too complicated. So one of the weaknesses in our forecast is we're using a daily Penman-Monteith equation. SENAR-CE uses the hourly, but we compared with the SENAR-CE, and it's not too bad in most cases. Where you have problems is if you have really high ET and you have differences in wind speed during the day. So if you have a night wind, you'll have different daily ET than if you have a daytime wind. If you have a strong wind during the daytime, you'll have higher ET. If you have a strong wind at nighttime, it doesn't make much difference because of the stomata. Okay, so that was always one of the problems in the old FAO publications. They talked about that. FAO 56, they didn't, but they also provided an hourly equation. Okay? So anyway, those are the two equations we use. The only difference, if you look here, there's a 37, well, they both have 37. The daily equation has, you can see this number and this number is different, and that's because of the canker resistance. Okay, so that's what makes the difference. The variables that go into this equation, what you measure to get the ETO, you have to have solar radiation, you have to have temperature, you have to have humidity, you have to have wind speed. That's it. Okay? The problem is you have to calculate the net radiation from the solar radiation, but there's a procedure that they came up with to do that, and that's built into the equation. So when you get this equation, you get all the calculations to get from solar radiation to the arsenic, okay, the net radiation. Okay, I really already talked about this a little bit. Spatial SENAR-CE. SENAR-CE stations, they use that calculation. The SENAR-CE have a website. Probably started out with 0 people. I would guess probably a third of the farmers in California, maybe a third to half of them probably access that. So it really was a big effort mainly by cooperative extension to go out and get farmers to start using it. But they do that. And I can remember going to meetings when we were starting SENAR-CE. I go to a meeting and for farmers to learn about how to do irrigation scheduling, and there'd be 1 or 2 farmers there, 10 or 15 people from government agencies, and 1 or 2 farmers. Now we have meetings, there'll be 300 to 500 farmers there all the time. So it's changed dramatically, but you have to promote it, you have to push it, it doesn't happen. Okay, and now they come and ask us to get more information, so it's really changed the law. Okay, and it's because of things like Mandelli was talking about. We're learning stuff all the time, and we're trying to put it out to the farmers as fast as possible. One of the problems with SENAR-CE is, if you look at that map, you can see those blue dots and red dots. You see those? The blue dots are the active stations, so the red dots are the inactive stations. They were there, but they've been taken out of commission and taken out. That's because most of them are on farmers' property. And so they'll make a contract with the state and they say, okay, I'll do it for 10 years. And then they decide if they want to go on again or not. So sometimes if somebody else buys the farm and they don't want it anymore, sometimes somebody will come along, they want it. But usually we have more trouble with people wanting it than people not wanting it. We have people come and request them all the time. And they usually get accepted or turned down depending on the site. The site has to be a good location for the station. If you don't have the grass around it, you're not going to get real ATOs. You have to have grass around it. The other problem is, we talked about spatial simus, but in some of the places there's a lot of distance between the simus stations, and people want to know what's the ETO between those stations. So Susan Houston and Quinn Hart, we worked 17 people in our department, and they worked on this for about 5 years. And they developed a method where they use they estimate solar radiation from sunlight. And they get the solar radiation all over the state, and then they use GIS to estimate all the variables they interpolate between the simus stations to come up with estimates for the temperature, humidity, and wind speed. And they put it all together and they estimate, I think it's 4 kilometers or 8 kilometers. Anyway, they estimate pretty accurately. So you can get ETO information all over the state of California. So if we look, for example, up in the northwest up there, there's almost no simus stations. There's not a lot of agriculture. That's supposed to be forest. And so there are places where there's not very many. It's still, every once in a while somebody wants ETO information. They use the urban too. They make them out of stations. Okay? Now, one of the reasons we do this is because there's been, I know there's been a big change from the irrigation methods. It used to be 80% surface irrigation. And so you only need a monthly data to be fine. You'll do a pretty good job with that. But when you go to using micro sprinklers or drip irrigation, you can irrigate every day. A lot of people irrigate drip irrigation every day, and they just try to keep the soil moisture at the right level all the time. And the ETO goes up and down every day. So if you only have monthly data, you're going to miss a lot of the variability. You can make errors. The efficiency of irrigation depends on if you put on the right amount of water. You don't want to put on too much or it's not efficient. So you need to have an accurate estimate of ET. So going from surface irrigation to drip and micro sprinklers has had it's improved our ability to have an efficient irrigation. Okay, so this graph on this is from data from Napa Valley. That's the premier winery growing region in California. It's only about an hour from Davis. But you can see on the left, those are 3-day sums of ETO that are plotted. And then on the right, there's 7-day sums. And you can see how different those two figures are. You see a lot more of the variability when you look at the 3-day sums than if you have the 7-day sums. We go down to daily, you'll even get more variability. So if you're going to irrigate every day with drip irrigation, in order to get the efficiency, you should have daily without transpiration. Referencing transpiration to do it. Okay? So that was the reason behind us going to get the forecast. And this is just an example. I did this. This is from Davis. This is showing how variable the ETO is. This was from 2021, and I can't remember which drop. It's going from March through June. So you can see how variable it is. I mean, you can get all the way up to about 10 millimeters a day, and as low as down here at 2.5 millimeters a day. So it's extremely variable. It depends on which direction the wind comes from. You know, it's very dry. If it comes from the ocean, it's more humid. If it comes from the mountains from the east, it's going to be dry. So you really need to have something like this if you're going to irrigate every day. But this also applies to urban. I know they didn't say much about urban, but you can improve. You can save a lot of water in urban areas. And you do it by giving the information every day and having an update every day. There's people set up controllers and you can just look at the ETO for today and they say, oh, can we put back a large row? This is how much I want to put back. But you can't do that with a monthly math. You can't do that even with 7 days of data. And the other problem with SIMS is good because it provides good accurate information, but it's in the past. So I don't know what the ETO is today until tomorrow. And so that presents a problem. So having a forecast gives the farmers more information for them to make planning. And they have to plan ahead because they have to order water from the water agency, and the water agency needs to know in advance how much they need to get, so they can order enough water that they need for the next day or next 2 days or next 3 days. And based on what the forecast is. So we wrote this paper recently. One of the questions that came up is, okay, came up with a method. I'll tell you a little bit about the method. We came up with a method to estimate the ETO, to forecast the ETO. We did this in cooperation with the National Weather Service. So I went to the National Weather Service office in Sacramento and asked them, would you guys be willing to try to forecast ETO? And they said yes. Yeah, because they're always trying to, they always want to do something that's, applied and helps people because it's good for them. And so they said, yeah. And so I talked to them about what you need. You need solar radiation, you need temperature, you need humidity, and you need wind speed. And they said, well, we forecast all those except solar radiation. We don't forecast it. And so I thought about it for a while, and I went back and said, well, the old NBAO publication, they didn't have solar radiation. They didn't have a lot of pyranometer sensors back in the 1960s and so on. But a lot of people used sunshine hours. And there's a conversion from cloud cover to sunshine hours, and from sunshine hours to solar radiation. So I just went back to this old FAO publication and pulled out a couple of equations, gave it to them. Okay, so they were able to forecast solar radiation. So what we did is we took a bunch of stations in California. Well, let me put out two first. We didn't use hourly data in the forecast. We used daily data. And that's because they do forecast hourly data, but it's a lot more difficult for them to program this into it. And so, and also I don't think they changed their cloud forecast that frequently. But they do forecast cloud cover. And so if they forecast cloud cover, we can estimate the actual potential sunshine hours, and from that we can get the solar radiation. So the question is, well, we can do that on a daily basis, or the actual? And we think it is. So that's the daily equation. You see the different, there's a 900 there, and this is different. Other than that, it's the same as the other two equations that I showed you, the hourly equations. So the big question is, if we use that cloud cover, can we estimate this accurately, and can we get ETO? How does it compare with what they do with SIMS? So that's what we did in this study. This is what we had to do. I just had to look up these two equations. This is the equation for actual and potential sunshine hours. This is out of FAO 24. And this is the equation for incoming solar radiation from the actual potential sunshine hours. So it was simple. But like I said, at first we thought we couldn't do it because they didn't forecast solar radiation. But you can use this. That's out of the FAO Irrigation and Drainage Paper 24. It was written by Bernbos and Pruitt. Pruitt was a professor in agriculture, and he developed a lot of this stuff. This is an example of if you go to the website for the National Weather Service, it started out in California. For 1 year, they tested it in California to see how it did. And then the second year, they said, no, we think it's okay. They did some testing on it too. And then they expanded to the whole country. So now anywhere in the United States, you can get ETO forecasts for up to 7 days. Okay, so I know people in Georgia who use it, people in Florida who use it. I mean, it's all over the place now. One of the things you have to do, if you go to the website, you can get there. This is the link that you get to it's called digitalweather.gov. And https://digitalweather.com, or .gov, I'm sorry. And they'll come up with this map. And they have this map for all their different variables. So they have like a list of 30 variables. So you have, this is a drop-down menu, which I can't show on this thing. But right here it says daily fret. If you click on that, you'll have a whole string of variables come down. It's down here at the bottom. So you just click on daily fret in inches. Well, this is in inches, unfortunately, because our farmers use inches, so that we pictures, and that's what these numbers are. You can zoom in and out. I forgot to put an example in there, but you can zoom into like 40 kilometers or something, 50 kilometers, and you can see all the towns and the roads and everything, and you see the numbers on there. It has a bar up here that allows you to choose the days. This would be the day that this is done on. So this is the current day. This would be 1 day more, the second day, third day, fourth day. So it's a 7-day forecast counting today. Okay, so if you're trying to do irrigation of turf grass in a city, if you've got a city park and you want to do an efficient job of irrigating it, what you would do is you look at this number right here. You get that number. So that's the numbers that are showing on there. If I put it on this one, it shows me the sum of those 2 days. If I put it on this one, it shows me the sum of those 3 days. Okay, but if I was just doing urban irrigation and I irrigated every day, I would just use that. And then I could just put it into my controller and it would automatically irrigate, all the golf course or whatever it is that you're trying to do. If you're doing agriculture, using drip irrigation, many people will irrigate every day, every second day, see different things. And it's easy enough to run and just set it to what you want. So that's basically what we developed. I forgot to point out to you, one of the problems back when we started SENAR-CE, I talked to a lot of TV stations and radio stations and newspapers about putting out SENAR-CE information, ETO information for farmers to use, and they all refused. It was really interesting. They refused to do it because they said, well, who makes this information? Who provides it? I said, well, this is California Department of Water Resources. They said, no. They wouldn't do it because they didn't trust them. They said, well, what happens if they don't get it? They said, nobody's going to call us and complain. And they said, if it comes from the National Weather Service, we believe it because we know that every day we're getting a forecast from the National Weather Service. So that's one of the reasons why it's taking off. They trust the Weather Service. They know they're going to get the forecast. And so that's one of the they never thought about that until I started talking to them. But I had so many people refuse to put it on TV or radio. It was interesting. But anyway, that's the way it works. Again, you have to choose the daily fret. You set it for however many days of day you want. There's actually a little box that shows up that gives you the sums. Gives you the sum over days, so it's easier to read. So you click on the map where you want to get the ETO information, and it will show up for you. It'll come in this little box and show you what the total up to the number of days that you had. So this is what we did. Daniela and I and several other people, we did a study to find out how accurate was it. So again, that's the equation up at the top. That's the daily Pendemonte. It's the same as an FAL 56, and it's the same thing that the American Society of Civil Engineers published. The hourly data is different. The hourly equation is different. The ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers, is better because it accounts for the small equation. So we use this equation. Again, we estimate RN, we estimate RS, and cloud cover, and extraterrestrial radiation, and a couple other things, but they're all available. So that's all done. What we want to do is we want to validate. So we took 15 of the SENAR stations. It was a lot of work actually, but these are Alturas is a high mountain. It's pretty flat. It's not super high there, but it's kind of high. Camino is close to Sacramento or close to Davis. It's up kind of in a forested region going up into the mountains. This is the Central Valley again. This is all the Sierra Nevada mountains. This is the Coast Range mountains. There's Bishop, which is about 2,000 meters high. I think it's in a valley up in the mountains. This is the UC Research Station part here. And 5 Points is another UC Research Station, University of California. This is in that agricultural region that Nelly was talking about mostly, Joaquin Valley. We had some on the coast, we had some down in the desert, and we tried to test these to see how well the forecast worked. And so this is an example. What this graph on the left is we did a 1-day forecast, a 3-day forecast, 5-day forecast, and a 7-day forecast. And so we would get these forecasts, and we had a visiting postdoc working with, no, he didn't have his PhD yet. He was working on his PhD. But he had to go in every day and get the forecast up. The 1-day, 3-day, 5-day, and 7-day forecasts. And then we would wait and we would report from the sim station what the ETO actually was, and then we would compare that. So it was a lot of work when they sit there and do that every day. But, so this is a plot. This is the ETO from Civis, which is what we're trying to get. We figured the Civis is more accurate, and then the forecast is on the x-axis. And you can see these are those 15 different stations that did a pretty good job. It's it's a pretty good job there. The only ones that we had trouble with were ones that were in kind of strange locations, like Meadowland is the one in the desert right next to the Mexican border. It's below sea level. Some days it's really windy, some days it's not very, there's no wind. Sometimes it's from the south coming up to Mexico, sometimes it's from the north. And there was more variability there, but it's also the highest BT rate, so the relative error wasn't so big. But it was more variability than the others. The one in Camino was a little bit different because it's surrounded by forest. And it wasn't really, it's hilly, it's not a very flat area. Most of the other ones fall pretty close to the line. That's a 3-day forecast. This is the 7-day forecast. You can see it's almost the same. We found very little difference between 1 day, 3 day, 5 day, 7 day. They all came out about the same. Another way we present it is this. This is a table that shows the 15 stations. These are the different sites. These are the locations here. And these are root mean square errors. The root mean square errors, you can think of it as being like if you have a 1-to-1 line where you think something should be the same. You can think of it as being like a standard deviation about that 1-to-1 line. It's kind of what it gives you. And so you see up here for 5 points, which is in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley. 0.6 for all those, 0.6 millimeters, so it's, it's like a standard deviation within 0.6 of a millimeter, which is really good. So, and that's over 5 months, 4 or 5 months. Shafter is another one that's nearby. The only ones that are Camino is a little bit bigger than one, and if you come down here and look at Meadowland, it's bigger. And this is the highest BT radio. That's the one that has very low winds. So as long as you don't have strange winds and not super high, they all seem to work pretty well. So what this tells us is that we can probably use the fret, and it's going to work fine for the farmers. Okay? Again, the advantage is that you get it ahead of time, so they can order the water ahead of time, they know how much they need, and they can be a lot more precise in what they're applying. So that's one of the big advantages. And conclusions. Comparison between FRET, forecast ETO, and Civis ETO show good agreement. I don't think anybody questions that. It works pretty well. Part of that error is because we're using the daily equation. Again, that's why it doesn't account for differences between daytime and nighttime wind. So in Meadowland, where we had the biggest problem, that's the difference. 7-day ETO forecast is nearly as good as 1 day. That surprised me. I thought, we did a study when we did the Civis project. We tried to forecast, but we were amateurs in forecasting. These are weather service. They've been doing this a long time. So their forecasts were better. We found that the farther away we got, the worse we were at forecasting. But that's not true for the National Weather Service. Number 3 there, considering all the data together, the R-squared range from 0.9 to 1. R-squared is how much of that variability can you explain from the forecast data. Much of the variability, and it's basically says a really high relationship between the two. And the course results were from Meadowland, Imperial Valley, Camino, and again, Camino is forested area, it's not really an open agricultural area, and Meadowland is in the desert with variable winds. And other than that, it did pretty well. And that's it. So.
Bom, pessoal, obrigado, Rick, mais uma vez. Thank you very much. O Amilcar está convidando a todos. A ideia é a seguinte: a gente faz uma parada aqui, um coffee break. A gente passa a fazer uma parada, fazer um coffee break ali. E depois a gente retoma e aí faz discussões, tira as dúvidas com calma. E a gente tem um tempo aí para discutir. Durante essa parada aí, além do coffee break também, quem quiser fazer interlocução com um slide lá no corporate, a gente viu um pouquinho. O Roger está aqui à disposição para fazer a tradução também. Obrigado, então. Vamos lá.
Tá falando assim na boca. Vai dela.
Mas eu ouço se você a cara do pessoal da minha preta não é nem isso? Eles lançaram agora o SENAR-CE. São israelenses, desde o lá em 65 Israel. Eles estão mais de 100 países. É uma potência mesmo na irrigação. Eles não são agora. Faz o projeto, está os equipamentos e você paga uma assinatura mensal. Está incluído no ponto. Mas foi onde?
Savings, cash using the how much the kilogram for the fruit, the nuts?
The market
I comparison the nuts test.
is about $7 per pound. Libra, 2.2 pounds, $15.
Yeah, 400.
That's the market. That's a high value.
Savings, just fashion, I should say. difference important for me, I try my English, but the French methodology is very used for dates, time dates. NOAA, NASA, NMC in USA. The dates for satellites, for the climate dates.
Climate data. It's called global climate
Yeah.
system.
NMC, the USA. NESA, NMC, KU.
Global
System. After that, about the cloud, for use cloud for estimate humidity. Use the radiation, or raw radiation flow. Líquido, por exemplo, que é a radiação líquida. Radiation for the satellite. Other method you use for seeds, use climate dates, but use station, local station.
Well, the spatial sim is satellite.
Calibration weight, satellite weighting the station, local station.
The spatial system.
Yeah.
But the net radiation is from the satellite. There is an overpass that the geostationary satellite called nodes.
Só aqui nós temos o presidente dos players. Sim, o ordem do USA, satellite, model for the climate prediction. COGE, I present you, what in the Rio, in the dams, monitoring in dams, water in dams, and in groundwater. Well, the COGE is monitoring water. Dams, prediction, the climate and the model climate. I need the university that still start.
mais com ela ali.
Começou dizendo que você estava em relação à água, ainda não tem especial, eles tiram dados específicos. Então, existem algumas leis novas que estão tentando limitar. Mas nós estamos utilizando 50% da água utilizada hoje lá é água subterrânea. E os níveis aí continuam caindo drasticamente, mas é o que tem, é a mesma situação de só que numa escala muito menor. Não tem outros recursos, eles continuam tirando e dando efeito. Quando é toda a sessão central, toda a sessão mais pro oeste, mais pro oeste.
Mais no oeste da Califórnia é costa, né? Eles vão ter que investir em especialização de água, essas coisas.
Eu acho que eles vão ter que investir ele disse até que tem algumas pesquisas agora tentando revitalizar águas mananciais para que tenha um controle de água subterrânea também, né? Porque não está retendo mercado de aquífero.
Porque, por exemplo, o Panamá está investindo em água de desalinizada.
Bom, pessoal, voltando aqui às atividades, só um informe. Hoje eu estou aqui nos informes, viu, amigo? O meu presidente aqui. O Renault vermelho 1659 está atrapalhando ali o deslocamento. Quem é que tem esse carro aí? Por gentileza. Um Renault vermelho. A placa final é 1659. Certo? Bom, eu acho que, em primeiro lugar, a gente poderia ver quem é que tem perguntas, e a gente. E o Viano já me solicitou também, quer fazer uma colocação, e a gente iniciar aí o debate. Né? A gente tem aí mais até meio-dia, né? Então, a gente pode abrir para perguntas. Quem gostaria de fazer alguma pergunta, ou eu passo a Viana aí para ele fazer essa provocação e essa sugestão. Viana, vem aqui.
Eu queria antes registrar, acho que a importância que tem para a utilização correta das águas, que é um fator limitante da região nossa, ela é importante do mundo todo, mas aqui na Califórnia ela é bem importante, na Califórnia também, é o celeiro agrícola dos Estados Unidos. Muito bem, então, feito essa importância disso, possível, bem 10 anos lutando, né, pelo menos isso, né, uns 8, né, de produzir essa tecnologia de indicadores de eficiência, a parte de água, a parte de recursos, retorno econômico, da parte de dinheiro, né, e da parte de empregos, enfim, são coisas importantes. Mas nesse aspecto, agora que nós discutimos hoje, eu queria, aproveitando aqui a plateia, em particular o nosso presidente Rafael, que vem, pelo menos para todos nós que estamos há 40 anos nessa área, no Ceará, plantamos aí o sistema de recursos hídricos, a FUSEMI, pela Secretaria, com a reestruturação da FUSEMI em 87. A gente já trabalhava um pouco no plano, no governo do Gonzaga Mota, seu pai era deputado e líder lá do governo dele, nessa época, 83. Nós somos realmente 40 anos. Praticamente no tempo do Sims, né, de 82. Muito bom. E lá, nessa passagem aqui, eu vejo algumas pessoas, o Fernando passava agora há pouco, até chamei o Circo para falar, a Milva. Nós chegamos lá no governo do Tarso, em 87, 1º de abril, quando foi criada a lei reestruturada, tirava a FUNSEMI das nuvens, colocava ela no chão, com recursos hídricos. Também, manteve nas nuvens, mas botou também no chão, né? Nós lançamos na primeira semana um boletim de chuva. Boletim. E aos poucos, né? Na SENAR-CE uma vez ligava perguntando, as rádios, isso aqui, hoje, né, qualquer lugar do Ceará e até fora, o cara liga para o estrangeiro, quando é que choveu, que está lá, isso aqui. Bom, na mesma FUNSEMI a gente abriu também depois um pouco a parte de açúcar, mas ela se consolida na FUNSEMI com um boletim de chuva e o boletim de previsão, análise climática, era monitor climático, era uma edição mensal. Isso em 87. Então eu vejo aqui, na COGÉ, quando eu fui presidente, saí de lá e fui plantar a COGÉ, em 95, em fevereiro, nós lançamos na COGÉ um boletim dos açudes. Hoje, o maior sucesso que tem aqui são essas mídias sociais falando, os caras que nunca foram dentro do sistema, mas eu chego que coisa maravilhosa, os caras dizem coisas importantes na linguagem correta, informando, tem um deles que não é meu parente, que era, que eu não sei quem é, mas cara, é um sucesso, fiquei formando tudo quanto era a situação dos açudes. Eu queria aproveitar essa oportunidade e fazer uma chamada de, nesse início desse projeto da COGÉ, do Espírito com a FUNSEMI e a SEDET, lá com o agronegócio, e também representando a Câmara de Água de Segurança Hídrica, que é a antiga Câmara de Água e Desenvolvimento, e lançar que a gente já comece a fazer um boletim da lâmina d'água para as várias regiões, ainda com as poucas estações que a gente tem. E vamos melhorando isso na medida que o projeto vai nos indicando. Esse era uma oportunidade que eu vejo de fazer nesse início, aqui com essa reunião de hoje, esse lançamento de fazer, já com as poucas estações que temos, já algumas indicações de um boletim da lâmina d'água ou do ETO, da evapotranspiração, da necessidade de lâmina d'água, que tem que transformar isso. O KC é um pouquinho mais complicado para as pessoas entenderem, para a comunicação popular. Mas, para os técnicos, o KC dessa região, e fazer esse lançamento agora, não é daqui ao final do projeto, não. É com o que temos e vamos melhorando com o projeto. Essa é a ideia.
Obrigado, Viana. Não sei se vocês entenderam.
Traduz aí, traduz aí.
Não, vai entender, o Rodrigo está lá traduzindo. Que o Viana, não apresentei. O Viana foi presidente da FUNSEMI, vocês apresentaram ontem, da COGÉ, foi superintendente da ANA, da Agência Nacional de Água, durante muito tempo, e é uma referência aqui dos recursos hídricos.
Câmara hoje, né?
Eu estou na Câmara Setorial de Segurança Hídrica. E a ideia é justamente isso, Viana. Quando a gente vai fazer o projeto, o projeto do Banco Mundial, a gente pensou em fazer um acompanhamento com as estações que já existentes, novas estações que foram adquiridas no projeto, estações de Surface Renew, essa que o Snyder apresentou, e isso tudo monitorado por um software, um sistema que está sendo contratado. O Rogério estava aqui, o Rogério do IPES, para fazer esse acompanhamento, e a FUNSEMI que vai fazer todo esse trabalho aí de acompanhamento. O que a gente fica preocupado é com o pós isso. O modelo, o arcabouço institucional de quem vai fazer esse trabalho de acompanhamento. Lá na Califórnia, dentro do Departamento de Recursos Hídricos, existe uma divisão de irrigação que acompanha tem uma equipe que acompanha as estações, a determinação da ET0, o acompanhamento dos KCs, as informações para os irrigantes. E os irrigantes também lá são muito, vamos dizer assim, eu acho que um ponto positivo esse do Viana é que a gente precisa sair a gente tem que startar alguma coisa e iniciar essa cultura, que a gente falou um nome interessante, a cultura do agricultor ler dados meteorológicos mais com uma interpretação mais dele mesmo, né? Ele entender o que é uma evapotranspiração, entender o que é um KC, saber que ele pode calcular aquilo ali e ter ali uma estimativa do uso da água. Isso é muito importante. Eu sei que isso leva um tempo, mas a gente tem que iniciar. Com a estrutura que a gente está montando do Banco Mundial, amigo.
Quantas estações são suas?
Nesse momento agora, a gente vai ter essas 8 estações de surface vinil, mas vai ter mais 23 de AT0.
Muito bom.
Fora a rede que eles já têm de estações. Isso tudo aí integrado, a gente pode ter muita informação disso e a gente pode, a ideia agora, assim, a missão agora é tentar transferir isso para o agricultor. A gente colocar em um site, e é isso que a gente quer, ter um site específico para que a agricultor acesse, não só site, né, mas toda a rede social.
Então, o que é que a FUSEM tem hoje?
Não, ela tem isso, tem a rede e tem o site.
Ela pode fazer um boletimzinho já hoje.
Específico.
Específico.
Aí, informando aqui, tem uma pessoa dele treinada para informar isso, o pessoal perguntar e saber.
Eu acho que é uma boa ideia do seu governo.
Eu acho que é uma ideia. A FAEG poderia encampar esse projeto junto com a FUNSEM. Quando eu falo FAEG junto com a FUNSEM, é pensando no futuro. FUNSEM é uma instituição que já está com 50 anos, né, esse ano. 50 anos esse ano. A FAEG é a federação que vai se perpetuar para sempre, assim. Já a SEDET é uma secretaria que no próximo governo pode ser no arcabouço institucional das secretarias, ela não existe lá.
Se quiser, vai ser uma só com a agricultura.
Não, pois é, mas aí mesmo assim muda gestor, muda coisa, eu acho que
vai ter uma área de agricultura.
eu vejo que a FAEG e a FUNSEM poderiam encampar isso aí e fazer, e aí a FAEG tem aqui a equipe específica para essa área, 2, 3 pessoas aí focadas nessa transferência da informação para o agricultor. Aquilo que eu conversei com o Vandenberg bastante, o Vandenberg está preparando aqui o projeto, mas me preocupo com quem vai ficar. E aí eu acho que a gente está no casamento. Por isso.
All this discussion is very important in terms to develop reliable information. But to our experience, it's also very important that you bring this information to growers and beyond, at least the growers that I know, in California, the only thing that convinces them to use data is money. So putting together a pilot project and show the difference in terms of expenses and income that you get without the information and using the information and the dollar economic terms, that is something that convinces growers. But still, it's good to develop reliable information, but it's also very important to have an extension organization that brings the information. Grower will never come to you. You always have to sit with them and show how to use the information. We have several bulletins in the different counties every week for what is going to be the amount of water needed by the different crops. Growers use those bulletins quite a bit, but because the farm advisor sat with grower leaders and show how to use the information, grower leaders take the information to other growers. And so it's kind of a training trainers, and then the information goes.
Obrigado, Daniel. Justamente eu penso exatamente como o Daniel falou, a gente precisa ter, primeiro, há pouco estava conversando com o Erildo falou sobre um aumento do custo da energia que vai haver aí nos próximos, né? Então, nos próximos dias. Isso aí já ajuda a sensibilizar o agricultor para é economia, porque ele vai querer irrigar melhor, porque ele vai pagar mais energia se ele irrigar muito, em excesso. Isso é importante, é um ponto positivo. E a gente precisa ter esses produtores, esses growers que ele falou, bem sensibilizados, e também ter os produtores de referência. Eu pego o João Teixeira, que estava há pouco aqui, ele é referência para todo o Vale do Jaguaribe. Se ele faz boas práticas na irrigação, ele serve de referência para os outros. E ele pode ajudar nessa transferência da informação. Então, exatamente. E a gente tem um instrumento muito forte de ajuda na governança, que é a Câmara da Segurança Hídrica, a Câmara Setorial de Segurança Hídrica, e da NADES, e a Câmara Setorial do Agronegócio também, que tem um papel fundamental. Então eu vejo isso. Eu estava conversando há pouco também com o Michel da 3V3, está ali atrás. Eu acho que a gente tem que trabalhar muito forte essa questão de absorção e de novas tecnologias próprias, de empresas que façam esse trabalho de transferência da informação para irrigantes, de assessoramento a irrigantes. A gente já tem empresas aqui que ajudam, fazem esse trabalho, mas a gente precisa mais de empresas profissionais. Eu apresentei para ele, Rick, a experiência do Untitled Chapter, lá na Califórnia, da Tule, que ele criou a Tule, né? O Tom foi orientado do Snyder em doutorado e desenvolveu, com essa metodologia, desenvolveu uma empresa. Essa empresa hoje presta serviço para diversos produtores lá na Califórnia, no manejo da irrigação. Ela faz um SIMS privado e que de grande eficiência, e os produtores pagam por aquilo ali, para aquele serviço, e tem um retorno fabuloso. Acho que não sei se do slide a apresentação que eu tive que dar a saída, mas não sei se a apresentação do slide, se ele colocou um slide que ele sempre coloca, que é o retorno econômico, retorno financeiro do CIMES, né, ao longo dos anos para a Califórnia. Apareceu, né? Então, esse é um dado muito importante. E a gente tem que convencer, e eu sou governo, a gente tem que convencer o governo que isso é importante. Eu já estou convencido, mas ainda não, mas aí eu preciso dos parceiros. A SEDEC sozinha não pode fazer isso, ela tem que convencer a SENAR-CE, principalmente, ela tem que convencer o sistema SENAR-CE como todo, COGEC, o SEMI, todo. Mas a gente tem que fazer esse trabalho aí para convencer que isso é muito importante. É muito importante. Economizando água, economiza energia, aumenta a produtividade, eu gero emprego, gero renda. Esse é o desenvolvimento econômico que a gente quer. O Glauber queria fazer uma consideração também. Um amigo nosso da DAG, e vai fazer uma apresentação. Então, eu vou falar.
Bom dia a todos. Parabéns pela apresentação. Eu sou engenheiro de pesca, irrigação não é minha área, mas hoje a engenharia de pesca já trabalha em algumas coisas conjuntas. E sou usuário, não. Mais do que usuário. Para produzir eu não preciso de terra, eu preciso de água. E água de qualquer tipo que nós produzimos, né? E eu fico preocupado, Silvio e os amigos, pela excelente sistema, tudo que vocês estão colocando, mas eu fico preocupado com o custo. Porque às vezes o que é médio para os Estados Unidos, para nós é muito pesado, né? E não tem sentido no estado como o nosso, que é pobre em água, pobre mesmo. Nós somos ricos em inteligência, em inovação e tudo. Mas em água nós somos pobres. Até chovendo a gente guarda água para poder estar no outro canto, né? Eu fico preocupado de ver muitos projetos aí, principalmente de coco, que eu tenho visto, o povo ainda trabalhando com inundação. Isso é uma vergonha, nós temos que mudar esse cenário, né? E outra pergunta que eu queria fazer para eles é se já existe algum estudo sobre o reuso de água na agricultura, principalmente a tilapicultura, reuso, para depois usar na irrigação. Porque nós temos alguns projetos piloto aqui na Costa Nevasca que são sucesso. Eles já têm algum estudo de sucesso que a gente possa comparar. Só isso. Obrigado.
there is for sure studies on the reuse of treated wastewater in agriculture. I show the number, but the percentage of water reuse in California is very low, 0.7. 0.7% is reused. But because the technology is still too expensive with respect to the current cost of water. And so, but at some point, we need to get into those. But I'm not familiar, I'm pretty sure there are recycling of water into fish husbandry. But I'm not really familiar with those. I know that some of our researchers studied the potential for toxicity in wine grapes from recycled water, treated wastewater reuse from urban sector. So Steve Grattan has done a lot of work on the toxicity levels and on the long-term physical changes of the soil, because you have, you can do tertiary treatment, but you can do also partial treatments and reuse that water, and not with the cost of tertiary treatment. So there's a lot of interest going around, especially during dry years. Still, the percentage is very low. There's also a lot of interest and a lot of research on treatment of ocean water for water desalinization for agriculture, because agriculture is a huge business, and if it has to keep growing because the population keeps growing. So there's this continuous pressure of growing the productivity to feed the people. And let me tell you, it's totally unsustainable. It's totally unsustainable. The way it is now is totally. So the only criteria that has been used for the last 50 years is water productivity and dollar production, right? But the environment and the environmental sustainability is now coming into place, because everything that has been done has a cost in terms of the environmental health. And so, but still very little water recycle. I think we have to go into the future with much more research to lower the technology, the cost. When Silvio and the other 8 visitors came to California, we went to a treatment wastewater plant and treatment wastewater reuse system. It was in Watsonville, it's called Pajaro Valley Water Management Agency. They do a lot, in California they do a lot of urban water use with treated wastewater, so like golf course, parks, and so we call it the purple pipe. So the purple pipe is conveying treated wastewater, and it has to be separated from the normal pipe. So there's still a lot going on in urban water use, but not so much in agriculture, unfortunately. We are studying, Cal Valley and I are studying a new technology for condensation. It's called condensation irrigation. So we take brackish water, there's a lot of salt and a lot of other stuff. With solar power, there's a vaporizing. Solar power vaporizes the good part of water and keeps the brine and the residue away, and then we condense this vapor into pure water. And so we're studying this technology with a commercial company in California. The prototype is installed in the field. We're trying to grow tomato with this condensation irrigation. But we have to figure out the economics and the costs. There's a lot of attempt to reuse water multiple times. But again, as I said yesterday, I don't think California is a good example of water management, to be honest. Not at all. I've seen much better in the world.
Se a Califórnia não é bom exemplo, mas é o que o Daniel falou, que é a questão da Califórnia, porque também vai de encontro à gestão do uso da água. A Califórnia tem um modelo diferente do modelo brasileiro, né? é um modelo americano, nosso é um modelo francês, mas voltado para os comitês de bacias, então tem uma questão. De qualquer forma, a Califórnia é referência nas tecnologias desenvolvidas, na transferência da tecnologia ao agricultor. O agricultor lá é muito preocupado com isso, eu acompanhei. A gente fazia um seminário, vai fazer um seminário hoje, lá em Limoeiro, para falar sobre irrigação. Aparece 2, 3 produtores. Quando ele apresenta, vai fazer um seminário sobre irrigação, lotava um auditório de 100 pessoas, 200 pessoas, ou então no campo mesmo, o pessoal ia lá preocupado, que queriam se aprimorar. Então existe essa necessidade de informação, e eu acho que é o que a gente tem mais, de maior riqueza, como o Glauber falou, a gente tem muita tecnologia, tem boas cabeças e tudo, mas a gente tem pouca água e a gente precisa usar toda essa informação para fazer melhor gestão. Mais alguém gostaria de falar antes que a gente encerre? O Claudivan. Claudivan, depois eu.
Tá difícil.
Bom, primeiramente, parabenizar o Daniel e o Snyder, né, pelas excelentes apresentações. A gente vê, né, que o resultado aí é 40 anos, né, de trabalho, de pesquisa, né? E aí a importância que as instituições de pesquisa têm nesse contexto. Então, hoje a gente participa de um programa para o cientista-chefe, junto com a SENAR-CE, com o Silvio, que envolve a Embrapa, a Universidade Federal do Ceará, o Eficiência, e você vê que o que vai ser conseguido ao longo do tempo, a pesquisa tem uma participação muito importante. Nesse contexto da eficiência da água, né, a gente tem, dentro do programa cientista-chefe, tem uma das ações de pesquisa que é coordenada pelo professor Valmir, que aquele ano também participa, no Mandenberg, e ele tem feito a avaliação da qualidade da irrigação nas áreas irrigadas. Né? Então, ele tem trabalhado no Baixo Caraú, Valadas Norte, que são áreas irrigadas do noroeste aqui do estado do Ceará. E ele mostrou recentemente, né, os resultados que a eficiência da irrigação é inferior a 70%. E é uma irrigação localizada. Certo? Então, o problema não existe. Né? E essa adoção do conhecimento, essa adoção da tecnologia, não é uma coisa, você fala uma questão cultural, né? É uma questão que a gente vai conseguir mudar, mas não vai conseguir mudar de um governo para o outro. Né? A gente vai conseguir mudar com instituições consolidadas, como a FUNSEM, como a Embrapa, né? Com parcerias, reconhecendo as experiências, né? da Califórnia. Eu acho que é isso, acho que é uma mensagem nesse sentido. Em relação às palestras, eu tenho uma pergunta mais para o Daniel, porque ele falou muito lá de trabalho, e essa questão que você mencionou em relação ao Pistachio, né? Chama a atenção primeiro uma pergunta mais em relação à cultura, né? Se ela tem algumas exigências ecofisiológicas do ponto de vista da fotoperíodo ou temperatura, né? Essa não seria uma pergunta mais específica. E uma questão que você falou, a questão do adensamento nessas condições de estresse, né? Então você mostrou que uma redução da produtividade de 48%, mas a planta ocupa metade do espaço da planta que não tem estresse, né? O adensamento. A gente demonstrou isso com feijão, né? Em 2011, a gente fez um trabalho com feijão de corda, né? E a gente demonstrou, inclusive, avaliando aspectos fisiológicos, né? A parte fotossíntese, porque quando a planta cresce menos, a luz entra mais, né? Então você acaba tendo uma taxa de fotossintética maior. Infelizmente, na época eu não consegui convencer as boas revistas internacionais. Eu me lembro que eu submeti para, acho que foi para o Journal e Irrigation Science, mas acabaram não aceitando. Eu publiquei na revista da segunda divisão, quer dizer, não foi uma revista top. Mas os colegas, uma vez eu fiz palestra na Bahia, né? No outro estado aqui do Nordeste, e o pessoal está mostrando isso na hidroponia. Ou seja, na hidroponia, cultivo de alface, né, de culturas, você também pode adensar e acabar numa mesma área, né, tendo uma mesma produção, embora numa condição de estresse. Né? Aí a minha pergunta é se esse trabalho que você sugeriu, do Pistachio, do adensamento, já foi feito, né, que você fez um comentário ali, que eu compreendi, que seria uma ideia de você adensar e você teria uma mesma produção ou até uma produção maior, não sei. Então, já perguntando nesse sentido. E uma outra pergunta é se essa salinidade, né, ela está associada também com a água. Você também fez essa mostra, mostrou que também há uma pior qualidade das águas. Essa salinização está associada com a qualidade da água. Ok? Então, obrigado.
I hope I got the question right. So the first question is the ecophysiological adjustment of pistachio. Pistachio has a high tolerance of salinity. It doesn't have a high tolerance of hypoxia and anoxia. So if it can tolerate high level of salinity and mainly calcium and magnesium salt, no problem. As long as there's a very good draining condition, no problem at all. When the level of salinity is associated with a marine deposit, so it's a salt in the soil, is not induced by irrigation water. The area where it's grown used to be a marine deposit in the geological area, so this is salt that comes from a marine deposit, so it's sodium chloride. As the level of salinity increases, the level of sodium increases, and the deflocculation of clay. So that basically, we saw that the tolerance is around until 7 or 8 decisiemens per meter. Beyond that point, you start having problem with anoxia and hypoxia. And this is, the crop is suffering a lot of this lack of oxygen at the root level, but at the same time, it can concentrate a lot of sodium in the roots, and so counterbalance the osmotic, the lower osmotic potential, and still extract water. But of course, it's going to suffer. So, to my knowledge, nobody has tried to still yet to increase the tree density, but mainly for machinery problem, because the harvester need, the shaker. They shake and they move, and they have a certain dimension. So nobody has yet tried to increase the space of to decrease the spacing on the trees, but just for mechanical reasons. And the second question is about the salinity, right? So the salinity is basically in the soil, difficult to leach also. So growers think that by irrigating a little bit more, they're going to leach the soil. It's not, as Arabic is a muddy mess. There and water is ponding, so basically they make even worse. And so what we are being suggesting is keep that water that you're irrigating with, keep part of that water for the winter, and then you do winter leaching because there's much less soil evaporation, the plant is dormant, so there's no problem in toxicity, and there's more time to penetrate. And so this is what they start doing it. But other than that, it's really difficult management of salinity in those soils. It's a mess.
Thank you. Miles?
Bom dia a todos. Parabéns, Marlos Bezerra, da Embrapa. Primeiro, parabenizar os dois pelas apresentações. É interessante, eu ia fazer duas perguntas, mas uma o Claudio já fez. Era relacionado à questão do adensamento em condições de salinidade. Mas eu, de certa forma, vou repetir a pergunta do Claudio, e o professor Daniel aí falou da questão do pistacho, mas perguntando de uma maneira geral se em pomares de espécies permanentes, espécies frutíferas, adensar em condições de salinidade é uma alternativa ou se traria mais problemas. E a primeira questão que eu queria colocar era para ver, também tem a ver com o que a gente já comentou, da taxa, da dificuldade da pesquisa chegar até o produtor e ser efetivamente utilizado pelo produtor. Então, a minha pergunta é em cima dos dados que você apresentou, professor Daniel, com relação também ao pistache. Você mostrou aí que há uma redução bastante acentuada na demanda das plantas em condições de salinidade. Mostrou aí os KC, o que é utilizado lá e o que você alcançou com os níveis de salinidade. Então, a minha pergunta é, depois desse trabalho, houve mudança do que o pessoal utiliza lá para fazer a irrigação, ou isso foi assim de imediato, ou tem dificuldade desses seus novos dados ser colocados e utilizados pelos produtores? Para a gente ter uma ideia de como é o nível de utilização das informações de pesquisa lá na Califórnia. Aqui a gente conhece, e a gente sabe que é bastante difícil.
Thank you so much. Okay, the first question is about densification, more tree per acres. Growers are doing it anyway, so they try to tighten the planting spacing in order to have more canopy per hectare. They're doing in almonds, they're doing in citrus, they're doing in pistachio, regardless of the level of salinity. What they understood in the saline soil is that the plant never going to compete with each other because it's never going to develop at the maximum level. So it's going to be a small tree, and so they're elaborating on planting more. I think there are some other way that we can relieve the problem in saline solid soil with cover crop, for instance. During our research, there were like two orchards, one in front of the other, one with winter cover crop and the other without winter cover crop. There was a lot of compaction in the bare ground, the orchard with bare ground. And this is because the clay soil tend to compact with the machinery. The other orchard had cover crop during the winter, so they were developing cover crop is a common practice in California now because it helps infiltrating more water, creating the microporosity. So the two orchards were day and night, same level of salinity, same type of water, same age. You see an enormous difference because more oxygen into the roots, more water penetration, better efficiency in leaching. I think that could be a way to manage these marginal soils. But of course, cover crop requires a little bit of water. We're trying to see the difference between cover crop and non-cover crop. So that's one thing. I think the problem will have to be managed very carefully in saline and solid soil. And I don't think that increasing the number of plants will increase the problem. No. It needs an accurate management of the ground, for sure, and the leaching. So this is one. In the other one, the transfer of this information to grower. So first of all, we chose growers where to do this research. There are leaders. So we work with a commodity, the Pistachio Research Board, and the Pistachio Research Board said, work with this guy, and this guy. Those are our best growers. And all the other growers look at this guy and say, hey, let me see what he does. Let me see how he reached all this production. So this was the first key because we want a reliable partner. So if you commit for 4 years and the guy said, no, I want to, after a year, they say, no, I don't want to continue anymore. It's a problem because those are investment in research. So we chose the good leader, good grower to do this research, and they learn easily how this information can be applied to their orchard. So what they did, they noticed that our new crop coefficient basically was telling them to put much less water at the beginning of the season, much more water at the beginning of the season, much less till at the end. So the first impact that we had, the guy tried to schedule irrigation according to our new KC, and he said, I have much healthier orchard now because they're drier, closer to the harvest, much drier. I don't have phytoaflatoxin, I don't have pest problem. It's much better for me, this type of land. So we basically gained the trust of this grower, and this grower has a big processing plant. So it's kind of a automatically transfer information. Of course, we did a lot of meeting with 300 growers to show the results, and we asked this collaborator to talk and say, what are the impact of, so we have to go through that, not a top-down approach for sure. And the key to me is the extension. The extension help us to have also a farm advisor in the different county that do, update this information and then convey this information to growers. So it's the cooperative extension managed by the university, to me, is the key of success. In my country, in Italy, it's managed by the state. Nobody cares. Nobody listens to these guys. I don't know, because they don't trust it. Because they don't trust it, when they call it, they don't go to the field, they don't assist the growers. So it's a different logic. But when the university is like an independent, it's not the government, it's an independent entity, and says there to assist them. So whenever we receive a call from a grower, the day after we go and say, what's the problem? How can we solve the problem? So we are more on their side, and they see the government, even in California, they see the government wants to know what they do to pull out more taxes. It's a different logic, right? But I think the important part is having an efficient extension service that do research and do transfer. So my position is 50% research and 50% outreach, 50% training and education. And most of the specialists have this kind of balance where we have to do research. We cannot only educate them, we have to do our own research, and the research is normally agreed upon with the growers or with the commodity. So the project that I have, most of the funding comes from Pistachio Research Board, Citrus Research Board, Almond Board. So they call us and say, we need to solve this problem, do your research. And that's key to me for the agriculture. They keep investing in technology, development, novelty, and so that keep increasing the productivity.
Thank you very much. O último, vou só finalizar com o Michel, vai ser o último porque a gente já está com o horário, tem que sair. Michel, você quer falar daí?
Olá, tudo bem? Sou o Michel, sou o CEO e fundador da 3D3. Queria iniciar parabenizando o trabalho aí do Rick e do Daniele, né? 40 anos não são 40 dias. Né? E justamente pensando que 40 anos não são 40 dias, eu queria que o pessoal entendesse melhor que um trabalho que está sendo feito no Estado não é perdido. A gente está plantando para colher talvez daqui a 40 anos. Né? Enfim, eu acho que a gente está no caminho certo. E eu tenho alguns questionamentos, né? Basicamente 2 questionamentos. Um para o Silvio e estendo também esse questionamento ao pessoal da FUNSEM. Né? A gente está num trabalho de catequese, eu costumo dizer isso. Né? Então a gente não pode levar informação de qualquer jeito para o irrigante, a gente tem que levar informação de qualidade, isso é um ponto indiscutível. Né? O meu questionamento vai na linha das estações que a gente já tem hoje meteorológicas, né? Se elas obedecem grama, área, sei lá, de 10 por 10, se obedece também questão de irrigação, enfim. São fatores que são importantes para a definição de um bom dado de evapotranspiração de referência para que o agricultor tenha um dado que ele realmente possa olhar e validar e dizer, não, esse aqui eu posso usar de olho fechado. Né? O segundo ponto é uma pergunta já para o Daniel e para o Snyder, com relação às estações de surface renewing. Né? É um avanço incontestável, né, as estações, mas o meu questionamento é o uso dela para evapotranspiração de referência em locais onde você tem várias culturas em condições diferentes e em estágios diferentes. Né? Como é que a gente pode usar esse dado para evapotranspiração de referência para essa aplicação?
That's what we use the crop coefficients for, to adjust for all those differences. The reference evapotranspiration is just for the irrigated and the crop coefficients adjust for the size of the crop and the management and other factors. So, it's somewhat difficult. I know they mentioned that, well, we went from surface irrigation to micro sprinklers and it's changed the crop coefficients. So we're going to so we're doing more work to try and put all the crop locations. And, but like I said, there's so many things that affect it. But in general, you know, if they have plenty of water, the crop coefficients are not so different from one. But you can have some. It depends on how rough the surface is, how fast the wind's blowing, and different factors that affect the crop coefficients.
Acho que a próxima a May quer falar?
Não, até que ele perguntou para você.
Até que ele perguntou.
Sobre as estações, a grama é um problema. Realmente aqui no nosso semiárido, né, a gente vai ter que conversar sobre isso nessa ideia. Vamos ter que fazer uma irrigação de grama na área ali das estações. Sobre o respeito aos limites 10x10, tudo isso está dentro. Tem um outro ponto que ontem mesmo o Dr. Snyder e o Daniel estavam lá na FUNSEMI. As estações da FUNSEMI são estações meteorológicas, então, que a gente incluiu, claro, sensores suficientes e adequados para calcular o ET0, no caso. Mas tem um problema. As estações meteorológicas, as medidas de vento, por exemplo, são a 10 metros de altura. Exatamente. Então, normalmente se usa 2 metros, eu acho, né, para cálculo e tal. Então, a gente estava já conversando sobre essa questão. Mas eu acho que tudo isso tem que ser ajustado, adaptado, porque é um esforço muito grande da instituição que tem que atender as questões meteorológicas e, obviamente, aos outros usos. Essas novas estações, as 23 de ET0, já estão quase todas instaladas. A gente já está com transmissão por satélite COIS, fazendo a transmissão dos dados acessados a cada hora. Porque a gente viu que outras formas de transmissão de dados são um pouco complicadas aqui no estado, né? Transmissão por telefonia não funciona na maior parte dos lugares. Fora isso, a gente tem outro conjunto de estações, o que a gente tem chamado de uma rede de referência. Manutenção extremamente caro. E a gente, além dessa rede de referência, o nosso compromisso de manter tudo funcionando com o mínimo de falhas possível. E um outro investimento que a FUNSEMI fez agora, nós contratamos equipes que vão ficar sediadas, equipes de manutenção, elas já estão contratadas, estão sendo treinadas agora e vão ser responsáveis, vão ficar em Quixeramobim. São 3 equipes e um outro supervisor dessas equipes. A gente aumentou, nós éramos só 2 equipes, agora temos 5. Né? Então a gente vai ampliar essa questão da manutenção também. Na própria aquisição da estação, às vezes nem é tão complicado, o problema é o depois disso. Né? Então tem uma preocupação muito maior. Outro ponto, Silvio, que acho que vale a pena mencionar, tem os trabalhos de levantamento cadastral, né? E a outra coisa que é importantíssimo são os cursos, né? Os 60 cursos que a gente já vai contratar e tem a ver com a capacitação do irrigante também.
Obrigado, Meire. O Luiz, eu quero só fazer umas considerações.
It's hard to hear this at the same time. There's a couple of points there. One thing I mentioned at the other meeting, I forgot to mention here, is the cost of SIMIS and how much the farmers benefit, California benefits from it. It ends up that California makes money by putting those stations up. They actually get more money. And so they're not against it at all. That's why it's free. There was a big argument on whether farmers should have to pay for it. And they decided, no, they're making money anyway. So the reason it costs $850, well, this was a study of the year 2000. So this was like 18 years after we started SIMIS. They did a study, the economists did. They found out that it cost $850,000 a year to run the SIMIS network. And that's for paying for the computer people, the maintenance people, the people that work on disseminating information. It was $850,000 a year, but they estimated that the increased profits that the farmers got, net profit, was $64 million a year. that the production went up, that the cost of the water, they were using less water, they were using less energy, $64 million a year more in profits for the farmers, and the taxes they paid more than paid the $850,000. So they were actually making money doing it. I noticed that everywhere I go, in Chile we said the same thing, you know, in Spain I've been there and talked to them, Italy I've talked to them about it. There's no reason not to do it. It's beneficial to the farmers, it's beneficial for everybody. Because it helps you save water. And I think that's the problem, is you have this conception that it's going to cost a lot of money to put the network. But the government's paying for money, they're going to make money. The farmers will pay more taxes, but the farmer will still come ahead and make more money. There's no downside to this. And we didn't know that. This was 18 years after we started. That we figured out that it's actually beneficial. And that's 20 years ago from now. So I'm sure it's even more than 65 years ago. And they changed crops, they changed irrigation systems, so there's more energy use because they're using pressurized systems now more. So I think they don't even argue about it anymore. They just say, no, we make money, we'll keep it going.
I want to make another comment. We always think about, good information for irrigation management in terms of water saving. Well, it's not always a water saving. We're doing another research in citrus. It's actually measuring much more than what the growers think. And so sometimes it's optimizing the water use for better productivity. But for instance, in citrus, Rick Snyder did research in 2004, 2005. And the normal crop coefficient from FAO for citrus are 0.65, 0.65, 0.65. We measure 1. But where we measure 1, it's basically the growers have 3 times as much the average county production. So, sometimes optimizing irrigation is not always saving water, but it's making more profit out of the water. So this was one example. The other example we had from Pistachio. When you win the trust of growers, then you can continue, you can follow up. My father used to say, when I was growing up, so get a good reputation, then you can sell vinegar instead of wine, right? That was a joke. But anyway, when we started this research on Pistachio, we had a very good grower on a different side of the valley that was having like 30%, 40% more yield than anybody else in the valley. So how come this guy had every year 5,000 pounds per acre, every year, without that fluctuation? So we started digging further. The guy had a cover crop and he was doing a different type of pruning. So he's doing something that is really triggering curiosity. Now we ended up putting another project to see the effect on water productivity of the cover crop and the pruning in terms of the light interception. Light interception. So the guy is optimizing the light interception and always having a little bit more water use, like 15 to 20%, but his yield is 35-40% higher than everybody else. So, and then we put another project. So it goes on. When you win the trust of the growers through the extension, you can keep going to the follow-up. I think it's very rewarding for us because it never stops.
Another comment, you asked about the grass rolling stations. Like, you don't need to put up 50 stations. You need 10 stations, maybe. We have 10 stations, you work on that, you come up with this forecast E2, you use those stations to validate your forecast. And once you've got that figured out, you might not need to meet those. It's good to have them to keep testing all the time and make sure you're getting good estimates. The other stations are perfectly good climate stations. So we don't use our finished stations, we don't use those for climate studies at all. Because it's not a normal surface. But the problem is the equation for ETO was developed when the station was over grass. Well, when I used to teach this stuff, one of the questions I always asked was, if I put a center station on a asphalt concrete in the parking lot, And is it going to have higher ET than over grass, or is it going to have lower? You're using an equation, and the temperature is going to be higher over the parking lot, and the humidity is going to be lower over the parking lot. Probably have stronger wind over it because it's not as rough, it doesn't slow the wind down as much. So the parking lot's going to say the ET from the parking lot is a lot higher than it is from the grass. It's not. It's zero. And that's the problem you have if you have a dry surface out there. It's going to indicate the ET is higher than it is. We have a problem when there's a drought, because a lot of the farmers don't want to irrigate grass during a drought. But what that does is it makes our ETO estimates higher than it's supposed to be, so all the other farmers are over-irrigated because they're making this mistake of not keeping the ground. So it's kind of important. But the big advantage of front is you save a lot of money. The information is in the future. You've got forecast, which is better for the farmers because they can plan ahead and do a better job of matching. So we don't need 152 stations in California. We need maybe 50 stations that need really good stations that we can count on. And so you don't want to get in your head, you have to have one station. Because you don't have to have an every farm, you don't have to have a station. Usually we figure, I don't know how variable it is here compared to California, but anything within 50 or 60 kilometers of the station usually is okay, unless you're on the coast. Right on the coast, because of the mixed cloudiness, you get some problems because you might have one place that's cloudy, another place that's not. And we have that problem in California too. So on the coast we need more. But I think, if you use the forecast is accurate. If you get a pretty accurate estimate of the solar radiation based on the cloud cover, you should be okay. So I really think that that's really good. And you need to have a few good stations to make sure, maybe in different climatic regions or something, to make sure that it's accurate. And then over time, people refine it. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much, Rick. Pessoal, só queria convidar aqui o Darão, viu, que eu venho aqui só para entregar aqui, tinha uma foto aqui com nossos convidados. E uma salva de palmas aí para os convidar também, o André que sugeriu, a equipe que faz, o pessoal que faz parte do projeto e tudo, as instituições, a gente pode tirar uma foto de todo mundo. Todo mundo.
Pagou.
Tem várias fotos.
Eu não tenho medo de vender informação não, que dá para pagar os agricultores. O vendimento vai ser bom. Dá para pagar até a água.